Another month has come and gone, so it is time for my May 2023 reading wrap up. I read a lot of books this month. I haven't yet calculated my stats, so I'm not going to share that for the video right now, but you can see my stats, like my average star rating, and you can see how many books in total I read over on my Goodreads or my TikTok, but I'm not going to do that for my BookTube right now because honestly, I don't have the patience to sit down and count and calculate things. So I read a freaking lot of books in May for multiple reasons. First of all, my brain randomly decided that instead of just reading 60 books or whatever I set my goal to, I'm gonna read 100 books this year, which meant that I needed to get back on track to getting closer to 100 books. So I calculated it and I was really behind. So I was like, I'm gonna read a ton of graphic novels, a ton of manga, and a short story this month. So I did that. So my number is a lot higher this month. I also found that I'm really enjoying reading manga and graphic novels, but yet I keep trying to read more novels because it feels like what I'm supposed to do because I'm a reader. But honestly, I really enjoy graphic novels and manga, and I want to prioritize more reading things that I actually enjoy. And so I read a lot of things that I enjoyed this month because I read so many graphic novels and manga. Yeah, without further ado, let's get into this. The first book that I read helped me finish my goal of reading at least 3 Kristen Simmons books this year. I probably will read more of her books this year because I'm still trying to get caught up on all her books. I think I have Pacifica, Middletown, Glass Arrow, and her new book that's coming out later this year left to read. But the one that I chose to read for May is called Burned Away, and this is written by Kristen Simmons, of course. Burned Away is a short story set in the same universe as Middletown, so I haven't read Middletown yet, and because of that I found Burned Away a little confusing, but I will summarize it to the best of my ability. So essentially in Middletown, there's a bunch of factories that people are working at, and there's an uprising that starts in the factories. Now, Burned Away focuses on this gal named Karis, and she wants to be a reporter. And so she thinks that she needs to go find a worthwhile story to write about and give to the journal so that she can become a successful reporter. So she heads down to the factories to try and get some quotes, some interviews, and some facts for the journal. Now, while she's down there, she finds herself in a little bit of trouble, and a boy swoops in to come and save her. This is only 25 pages long, but I really enjoyed it. I think it was really interesting to have this short story set from the perspective of a reporter, because most of the time when you hear rebellions and uprising in stories, especially in young adult stories, you're focusing more on someone on the front lines of the rebellion and the uprising. But I really liked how this story was from the perspective of a reporter because it provided a lot of different insights into the uprising and rebellion that you don't normally see in young adult books. I just really appreciated how the romance wasn't forced in this because it's 25 pages long, and it would have been very easy to just make these two characters fall in love and have them have a happy ever after and sort of have insta love, but instead that didn't really happen, and I really appreciate that about this story. It's left sort of open-ended, so there is a potential for them to be together, and you can sort of imagine on your own what would happen for them, but you can definitely see chemistry between the two characters, so I thought that was really fun to read about. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I had a dock a star just because I found everything relating to the uprising to be very confusing because there's so many different groups of people that I couldn't keep track of because I hadn't read Middletown, but I feel like that's on me and not really that much on the story. So I did give it 4 stars. I do recommend it. However, I think you should read Middletown first. I haven't read Middletown first, but I think Middletown will give you sort of background on the different groups of people so that you can understand Burned Away better and how the uprising works. And then I read volume 4 of Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba. I looked up how to pronounce the author's name, so hopefully I can say his name right. Koyoharu Gotage. I just suck at saying names. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is obviously the 4th volume in the Demon Slayer series. In case you haven't heard me talk about this series before, Demon Slayer follows this boy named Tanjiro, and Tanjiro comes back to his home one day and all of his family has been slaughtered by a demon. However, one of his siblings, Nezuko, has been turned into a demon herself. He decides to save her and go on a journey to figure out how to turn her back into a human. So this story involves Tanjiro joining the Demon Slayer Corps so that he can fight demons, and it also involves him trying to find the cure to save his sister. I freaking loved volume 4. This arc is the spider demons arc, which creeps me out a little bit because I don't like spiders, and the spider human hybrids really freak me out. However, this volume gives the backstory to Zenitsu and it's the introduction of Shinobu. So I love this volume so much, so it is a 5-star read for me. I recommend checking the trigger warnings for Demon Slayer in case you have any triggers that are really challenging for you, because there is a lot of violence in here. I think this one in particular has violence, murder, domestic abuse, and spiders as the triggers, but some of the other volumes have different trigger warnings. So yeah, love this one so much. And then I read a book that I didn't like, and I knew I wouldn't like it. So I've been doing this like year-long like book bingo readathon challenge thing. I should look up what it's actually called so that I'm not butchering what it's called so much. So this is the Shine and Shadow Bingo Challenge as a part of the Shine and Shadow group on Goodreads. One of the prompts said to read a book with a black and white cover, and so I did that. I read Looking for Alaska by John Green, and now I knew I probably wouldn't like this one. I am not a huge John Green fan, and that should come as no surprise to anybody who has watched a lot of my videos. I love John Green as a person. I love his YouTube videos. I love his TikToks. I love his online presence. However, his books just don't work for me. So Looking for Alaska follows Pudge, and Pudge goes to this boarding school. He just decides to go to this boarding school, and the boarding school's in like, I want to say like Alabama or some boring place, and he meets this eccentric group of characters, and he finds himself really enamored with this girl named Alaska. So it's following this journey of these group of friends and all their pranks that they're pulling in the year, but also there is some really sad things that happen halfway through the story, and then it's how the characters deal with the sad thing. Whew, okay, so I really didn't like any of the characters. So the only characters I really liked were Takumi and Lara. I mean, I wasn't like a huge fan of either of them, but they were more enjoyable than the other characters. However, literally all their friends did them dirty and treated them like crap, so I kept getting really frustrated. I honestly don't know what Pudge kept singing in Alaska and what all the guys kept singing in Alaska. I was like, really? She is not that amazing of a girl, and yet everyone is obsessed with her. I also hated this like no snitching rule. You find about this early on in the book. The characters basically agree not to snitch on each other, and if you snitch on each other, then there can be like retaliation on you if you snitch on someone. I was getting really frustrated with this whole no snitching rule, because I was like, how can you address things like bullying and sexual harassment and things like that if there's this no snitching rule? So basically, like with this no snitching rule, if someone reports like bullying, they could be brutally retaliated against for reporting the bullying. So yeah, I do understand now after reading this book why some of John Green's books get banned. I do not agree with it, but there is pretty graphic sexual content in here, and there's tons of underage drug use and alcohol use. I don't agree that it should be banned, but I do see why there's content that would make people want to ban this book. I also got deja vu while reading this book, because Alaska felt like Margot from Paper Towns and Pudge felt like Q from Paper Towns, and it sort of felt like I was reading a more intense and more sad version of Paper Towns when I was reading this book. So, you know, I was having a lot of deja vu with this story. I do have to say, after reading 3 John Green books, I've noticed 2 things that makes me understand why people would like John Green books. I personally am not a huge John Green fan, but I understand why now. So there is good symbolism in his books, especially in this book, and it's also super fast-paced. I found this book just overall to be like bland and underwhelming and really annoying. So I gave this one 2 stars. I can understand why people would like it, it just isn't for me. Unfortunately, I went out and I bought like all of John Green's books when I was younger, and so I have all of his books on my shelf, and my OCD doesn't let me get rid of a book unless I've read it. So at some point, I will be reading all John Green's books just because I own them. I think the only one I don't own is the Anthropocene Reviewed. I'm not looking forward to reading more John Green books, but I'm hoping that one of his books will like change my mind about his stories, because they're so loved by so many people. I just personally feel like they're not for me, but I'm just waiting for that one that will like change my mind on all of his books. I'm hoping that it will be like maybe The Fault in Our Stars, because I like The Fault in Our Stars the movie, but just like I don't know if I'm gonna like the book because I haven't liked any of John Green's books. I mean, Paper Towns was okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't dislike it. It just was not great. So I went straight from Looking for Alaska to one of my new favorite books of all time. And it's so hard to summarize this book because the plot just like so drastically changes, and there's so many plots that like intersect throughout the story. So this book is called If You Still Recognize Me, and it is by Cynthia So. So If You Still Recognize Me, I think was like independently published, and then it was picked up by Harper Teen, so it's now been published by Harper Teen, so it's now been published by a bigger publishing company. I'm having such a hard time summarizing this book. Like, I literally just tried to summarize it and then had to delete everything that I tried to summarize it with because it was wrong. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that it makes it seem like it's not an exciting book when it really is. So Elsie is the main character, and she has a crush on her internet best friend Ada. Elsie is going to go on a trip with one of her friends, and she tells Ada about where they're going on the trip. Ada gets really excited to tell Elsie that her grandma, so Ada's grandma, had a friend who seems like it may have been like a sapphic relationship between the two, and the grandma's friend lived in the city where Elsie is planning on going on her vacation. And Elsie has a crush on Ada, so Elsie's like, I am gonna surprise Ada by finding this long-lost friend of her grandma, and this grand gesture will get Ada to see that, oh, we're meant to be together. However, before Elsie goes on her trip, she bumps into her long-lost best friend. Her long-lost best friend had moved away when they were younger, and they just lost like all contact, so Elsie decides to invite her long-lost best friend on this trip. So it's sort of like a journey of finding Ada's grandma's friend and all the different efforts that Elsie goes to finding this friend, but it's also like a lot to do with like family relationships, because there's complex family dynamics in Elsie's family. There is themes of grief in here, and obviously this is a sapphic love story, so there is some crushing going on in here. There is some romance brewing. I freaking love this book, but it's just so hard to describe like what it's about in one like coherent sentence because the plot is so complex, but I think that complexity works out really, really well. So I was like thinking this was just gonna be like a light cheesy romance, but then it was so much deeper. Like, I was surprised that it covers things like discovering where you fit in the world, and it really like unpacked a really toxic relationship that Elsie had in the past, and I found those to be really interesting, like those scenes focusing on that. And I think that's like really important for teens to be able to recognize, hey, I was in a toxic relationship and I am now gonna be better because of that toxic relationship. There's also a very diverse cast in here. I mean, there is tons of British Asian characters, and there's tons of sapphic characters. There's a character going on a journey with his asexuality in here, which I love. I'm ace. I freaking love that. And there's like older queer couples as well, which I really appreciated, because most of the time when I'm reading queer books, I feel like I'm seeing the queer books focusing on like teens and people in their 20s, and I was really appreciative that you get to see queer couples in here that are much older, because we don't see that representation enough in books. I also found that I really like Cynthia So's writing style. They're just such a great writer, and they're so good at writing fast-paced stories. This story does feel a little young though, but that wasn't that much of an issue for me. Like, all the characters are above the age of 18, but it reads a little young, but I found that okay because I still really enjoyed this one, and I gave it 5 stars, and it is now one of my favorite books of the entire year. I have been rambling so much in this video, and this video is already turning out to be really long, and I'm not even like halfway done with my wrap up for May. So let's see if I can speed this up. Next up, I read Homicide, the graphic novel, part 1. So this is based on a book by David Simon, and it was adapted by Philippe Squarzon. I probably said his last name wrong. Okay, so basically this is a graphic novel based off of a novel. The novel is like fairly popular, and well, I don't know if the novel itself is fairly popular, but it's had tons of TV show adaptations based off of the novel. Basically, this guy, David Simon, he had access for a year to basically the Baltimore Police Department's homicide unit. So he decided to shadow detectives and record everything that was going on and make a story out of it. However, I didn't really think that the story worked. I think that honestly David Simon should have focused on one case or a couple of different police officers in the homicide unit. I don't think it worked to follow dozens of homicide unit detectives and dozens, if not more, cases because it was just so confusing. You barely get any time spent on each case, so it's so hard to keep track of all of them. There isn't like satisfying resolutions to the cases because it's jumping from one case to another so quickly that you don't find like the answers to the cases a lot of the time. I think if it was going to focus on one case, it should have focused on LaTanya Wallace, but it didn't really do that. Like, I mean, it did cover that story probably the most out of all of the cases, but didn't really like cover it in too much detail. In terms of the graphic novel adaptation, because those criticisms probably had more to do with the original like novel, I think that this graphic novel adaptation didn't even work well as an adaptation. I felt that the art was too similar between the different characters, so it made it impossible to keep track of the different detectives. Like, I couldn't tell you who was who. I also found that the choice of the paneling didn't really work well for me because the way that they made the paneling, it was really hard to tell which panel you're supposed to read next. Because sometimes this story did like, you have to read all of one page first and then another page, and sometimes it decided to like do a 2-page spread where it just, you have to read horizontally instead of reading one page to the next page. But that didn't work well because it didn't really clarify like sort of which one you were supposed to be reading which time. So it was impossible for me to figure out which like panel I'm supposed to read next. And I read graphic novels a lot, so when I struggle with knowing which panel I have to read next, it is a serious problem with the book. Also, regardless of just like being confused and stuff, I also found this book really boring because it covers a lot of like police procedural instead of like action and mystery and suspense. So I ended up giving this one star. I did not enjoy it. I did not like it. I got this one at Emerald City Comic Con in case you can't tell. But like, honestly, if you want to engage with the story, do not choose the graphic novel adaptation. I have been reading reviews of the like book that this graphic novel is based off of, and a lot of my criticisms also apply to the book. So maybe if you want to like read this story, try one of the adaptations like HBO's The Wire. And then I read the Heartstopper Yearbook by Alice Oseman, and I freaking love this one. So this is sort of like a companion book to the Heartstopper series, plus there is a lot of like little short stories that are spin-offs of the series. So I really enjoyed this one. I found this to be really interesting, and I loved that Alice Oseman also went through her like process of writing Heartstopper in here and her like development of how she drew the different characters. I thought that was really interesting. So my favorite sections of the book are The Teachers, which is a mini comic following 2 of the teachers from Nick and Charlie's school, and you get to see that they have a relationship starting within the actual series. I liked the section on Halloween and the different costumes. I liked the alternate universes section, and I liked the Are You More Nick or More Charlie quiz, and it should come as no surprise to anyone that I'm more Charlie than Nick. Charlie and me have a lot in common. Of course, I love like everything about this book though. Those are just like my favorite sections that really stood out to me. So I ended up giving the Heartstopper Yearbook 5 stars, and I am so excited for Heartstopper Volume 5. I need it right now, and we're getting a Volume 6 now, so I'm very excited because I thought we were just getting a Volume 5, and then Alice was like, nope, you're also getting Volume 6, so super looking forward to that. And then I had a reread. I read Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I love Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and the more I read it, the more I'm like, wait, is this actually my favorite Harry Potter book? Because I have been saying that Goblet of Fire is my favorite Harry Potter book, but Goblet of Fire has some slow parts. But Prisoner of Azkaban is just all fast awesomeness throughout the whole story, and I just love it so much. And I understand why it's a ton of people's favorite in the series. And I feel like Crookshanks is such an underrated character because he's like working with Sirius Black to catch Wormtail, and I freaking like love Crookshanks and how smart and intelligent he is. And I feel like we don't talk enough about how Crookshanks is one of the heroes of this story. So I was marking characters in this book, in case you don't know, and I had Pansy Parkinson, Poppy Pomfrey, and Hannah Abbott marked in this book. Hannah only has one little flag right there, but yeah, marking characters, a lot of Madame Pomfrey in here because there was a lot of injuries in here. This was of course a 5-star read for me, and this was my 4th time reading this book all the way through, not including the bits and pieces of the audiobooks that I listened to over the years. So yeah, that was also my favorite book that I read this month, and I'm like purposely not talking about it too much because I've already talked about Harry Potter a lot on my channel before, and because this video is turning out to be extremely long. The next book that I read was my Kindle Unlimited book for the month, and that was The Indigenous People of Igbo Land, A Captivating Guide to the Culture and History of the Igbo People, a Tribe Blessed by God. This is by Vivian Chibufe. I'm probably butchered their last name. I wanted to love this book. I didn't know anything about Igbo Land, and oh my gosh, wait. I screwed up the statistics for this book because it like says readers also enjoyed on Goodreads, and it is showing 1 book that I haven't read and then 3 books that I marked as having read directly after reading this book. So I screwed up the statistics for this book. No, I do not recommend reading Demon Slayer if you enjoyed this book, despite what Goodreads may tell you. I was really looking forward to this one. I wanted to learn more about the Igbo culture and their history, but I found that this book read like a college essay, and that made this book really disappointing, unfortunately. Like, as I was reading it, I was like, was this legitimately written for college, or did this person just decide to write with the format of a college essay? It was complete with guiding questions, and it was complete with awkward transitions, and a conclusion that is typical of a college essay. And I think the biggest thing that made me think college essay was the weak citations. There's tons of weak citations. I was trying to just ignore them. And then the author decided to include a citation where they simply said, according to at least one historian. And I was like, that really hinders from your credibility to talk about this subject, considering you couldn't even cite which historian it was. You just said, according to at least one historian. So like, didn't really work for me in terms of how it felt like a college essay. I also felt like it was really dense with information, which didn't really work out well, considering the fact that like there are so many new terms that are specific to the Igbo culture that were included in here, and I was like, you can't have a story dense with information with all these new vocabulary. You need to spread it out more. But it was also like dense because it felt like the author was trying to include as much information as possible in the shortest page count possible. And I was like, you should have spread it out more, like found some way to break up the dense information more so that maybe the book would have been longer, but it would have been easier for your readers to digest the information. I did find the information about religion and women in the Igbo culture to be interesting, but I really had to sift through the dull writing to find interesting stuff. So I don't really recommend this book. I do want to learn more about the Igbo culture, but I'm gonna find somewhere else besides this author's work. Then I read another Demon Slayer volume. I read volume 5 and I really enjoyed this volume. I really like the demon that this story centers around. I felt like he adds so much depth to demons because until this point it feels like demons sort of have a very like, oh, I'm a demon, I kill people. Like, it feels like that's a lot of their backstories, but the demon in this volume, it really went deeper into his backstory and why he does what he does. I don't agree with his actions, but I did really like seeing that deepness. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. 4 more books left for this wrap up. Geez, I read a lot of books this month. So next up I read You Had Me at Ola by Alexis Daria. I loved the sequel to this book a lot, like Adios, but You Had Me at Ola was only mediocre. So this follows 2 stars of a TV show who end up falling in love. It's a steamy adult romance. But each of these 2 characters are trying to resist getting into a relationship. Her because she doesn't want to get into more drama with her relationships because she had a messy breakup that has been hitting tabloids everywhere and she wants to get off the front of magazines covers and tabloids. Ashton right here had something happen with a past relationship where he doesn't really want to get too involved with relationships anymore, and he doesn't want his personal life being revealed on tabloids as well. And so they both have reasons to not want to be with each other, but they both can't help feeling attracted to each other. Okay, so I have a lot of issues with this book, but I didn't exactly hate it, so I'm gonna just try and like summarize my issues briefly. So first of all, I didn't see any romance between the 2 characters. The romance felt like it consisted mostly of lust. Other than lust, I couldn't see why these 2 characters were interested in each other. Other characters kept saying, oh my gosh, you 2 have so much chemistry. I'm like, okay, Alexis Daria, show us the chemistry. Stop having side characters be, you 2 are so perfect for each other, you have chemistry. Show us. Don't tell us that, show us that in your writing. I felt that the spicy scenes in this book were extremely uncomfortable and cringeworthy, and I didn't like the scenes from the TV show that were included in here because like there's normal chapters and then there's like chapters where it reveals like scenes from the TV show that they're working on. I just felt like the TV show was really boring, and I was like, I'm sorry, but this TV show would not be popular if it was a real TV show. On a more positive note though, I really like the representation. There's good Latinx representation here, and there is also really great LGBTQ plus representation in here. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I found it to be really disappointing. Like, it wasn't bad. I flew through it. I found it to be like decently entertaining, but there was nothing like special or memorable about it, and I honestly feel like I'm just gonna forget the plot in like a month or two. So yeah, this one was 3 stars for me. I recommend that you start with A Lot Like Adios, because that one is exponentially better than You Had Me at Hola. This one wasn't awful, it's just not great. And honestly, if I had started off reading the series in order, I wouldn't have picked up A Lot Like Adios, because this one was so disappointing. And then I read Demon Slayer Volume 6. I love this volume because of how many new characters are introduced. You get introduced to all of the Hashira, and I love how much it focuses on Shinobu and Kanao, and I love Kanao so much as a character. She is so fantastic. I gave this one 5 stars. This one, I guess you could say, is sort of like filler between the like different demon missions, but I still really enjoyed this one. So yeah, 5 stars. I highly recommend this one. Although, check the trigger warnings for all of Demon Slayer, as I said earlier, but I'm just highly recommending you check the trigger warnings before you devote yourself to the series. And then I read Plus One by Rodkey Kelsey. Plus One follows this girl named Leahy, or Lahi, I think Leahy. It literally said how to pronounce her name in the book, and I should have like screenshotted that part so that I could pronounce it right for this video. Oh well. So basically she has beef with her cousin, and her cousin makes a big deal out of inviting all of their relatives to her birthday party and saying that they all get a +1. But on Leahy's card, she doesn't include the +1. And Leahy's like, why didn't you include it for me? And her cousin's like, oh, well, I knew you wouldn't be able to find a date for my party, so I just didn't include it on there, because her cousin's a literal jerkwad. Leahy's like, I can find a date. I have tons of guys who want me. So Leahy starts to go on a mission to find a date for her cousin's birthday party, and it is a week of disastrous dates. However, as she's going on all these dates, her older sister's best friend keeps popping up, and Adler seems to keep causing chaos with her dates. So Plus One is a really entertaining read. I found it to be very enjoyable. I found it to be very fast-paced. Like, even though I had a couple issues with the book, I couldn't stop reading the book because it was that entertaining. I loved all the LGBTQ plus representation here. I loved the plus size representation here and how that was written into the book. I felt that a lot of the side characters were fantastic. I loved Poppy, Liberty, and Adler. I felt like Adler really carried this book. He is like the charming male love interest that everyone can easily fall in love with. And honestly, because of that, I could see Plus One becoming a very successful new like YA book. Like, I feel like it could become the next To All the Boys I've Loved Before, The Kissing Booth. Like, I feel like it would make a great movie. I feel like all the teens could be obsessed with this one. My biggest issue with this book though is that Leahy is so freaking annoying, and I couldn't figure out why for the longest time. And then I realized she only cared about herself, and because she only cared about herself, she kept screwing up other people's lives. So that was a little disappointing to have a main character that I did not like and I did not vibe with. However, despite that, I really enjoyed this book. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. I do recommend it. I do think it is really entertaining, but know that the main character will not be this like amazing person that you'll relate to and love. But know that everything else about the book will be awesome. So yeah. And then the final book that I read this month was Demon Slayer Volume 7. I love Volume 7. I feel like Volume 7 is where my opinions on Inosuke really change, because he's really funny in this volume and he's really awesome. This is the Mugen Train arc, or the Infinity Train arc. I really like this arc. I mean, I don't like Rengoku very much, okay? Like, I know that's an unpopular opinion. He's just so derpy and I don't like his derpiness. But besides that, I love this volume so much, and I love the creativity behind the Mugen Train, and the author just does such a fantastic job with that part of the story and the creativity with it. This is like my 3rd time with this arc, because I watched the movie when the movie first came out, and the movie covers this arc. And then season 2 came out, and they basically split up the movie for the first half of season 2. So I watched that. And then now I'm reading the manga for that arc. So this is my third time with this arc and I still love this arc. I also love the demon in here. He's fantastic. He is so fun. So I gave this one 5 stars. It's donut time in the next volume. If you know, you know. I know this video is very long, but I hope it was entertaining. Those were all the books I read in the month of May. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to me if you haven't already. I have tons of other book related videos up on my YouTube channel, so feel free to just click on my channel and watch some of my old booktube videos. I'm sure you'll find some of them entertaining if you like this video. I hope all of you have a great start to your Pride Month. It's Pride Month. So yeah, I'll see all of you in my next video, and until next time, goodbye.